"What the hell are you doing with my son?" I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Riker Vale, New York's most dangerous mafia boss, stood behind me, his cold gray eyes burning into my back like ice and fire combined. My heart slammed against my ribcage as I slowly turned to face him, hands still raised in a defensive stance I'd been teaching to the small boy beside me. But I hadn't committed any crime. I was simply showing his blind son, Cade, how to protect himself. This basement was my sanctuary, the one place in the massive Vale mansion where I came every morning while Riker was occupied with his business dealings. The cement floor was cool beneath our feet, and dim lighting cast long shadows across the empty space. Cade was only 7 years old, but there was a pain in his sightless eyes that no child should ever carry. He couldn't see the world around him, yet I knew deep in my core that a fighter lived inside that fragile body, and I desperately wanted him to recognize his own strength regardless of what the world told him about his limitations. "I was just teaching him the fundamentals, Mr. Vale," I managed to say, forcing my voice to remain level, despite the tremor threatening to break through. My Omega scent shifted involuntarily, sweet vanilla now laced with unmistakable fear, and I knew Riker could detect every nuance. Alphas always could. They were biologically programmed to read Omegas like open books, to sense our emotions through pheromones we couldn't fully control. Riker took one deliberate step forward, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete, and my heartbeat accelerated to a dangerous rhythm. His dominant pheromones flooded the enclosed space. Thick, overwhelming, commanding, every instinct in my Omega biology screamed at me to drop my gaze, to submit, to kneel. My knees actually trembled with the effort of remaining upright, but I locked them tight and held my ground, forcing myself to meet his penetrating stare. I was Cade's tutor, nothing more. One wrong move, one perceived threat, and Riker could dismiss me without a second thought. "Fundamentals?" Riker repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave that sent shivers down my spine. "You're an Omega, Flynn. What exactly do you believe you're qualified to teach a Vale?" His words cut deep, slicing through my carefully constructed professional demeanor. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated me solely because of my designation, because society deemed Omegas as weak, as nurturers rather than fighters. But when I glanced at Cade, his face turned in my direction even though he couldn't see me. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. That child trusted me. That simple fact gave me courage I didn't know I possessed. "I just want Cade to feel strong," I said quietly, choosing my words with surgical precision. "Even though he can't see, he deserves to know he can defend himself, if necessary." The statement rang in the air between us like a challenge I hadn't intended to issue. Riker remained silent for several long seconds, his jaw working as if he were physically restraining whatever response wanted to escape. His eyes never left mine, searching for deception, for hidden motives, for any sign that I posed a threat to his son. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a quick message, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. 2 minutes later, the basement door opened and his head guard entered. Knox, a towering alpha whose scarred face told stories of violence I didn't want to imagine. "Take him upstairs," Riker ordered, gesturing toward me with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Make certain he doesn't come near my son again." My stomach dropped, a sickening sensation of failure washing over me. I looked at Cade, who had gone completely still, his small hands now gripping the fabric of my shirt with desperate strength. "Please, Mr. Vale," I started, but Riker raised his hand in a gesture so final, so absolute, that my words died in my throat. "One more word and you're permanently removed from this house," he stated flatly, no room for negotiation in his tone. I bit down hard on my tongue, tasting copper. Knox's large hand closed around my upper arm, his grip just shy of painful, and he began pulling me toward the exit. Each step felt like a betrayal, like abandoning the one person who actually needed me in this cold, hostile mansion. But just as Knox dragged me past the threshold, Cade's voice rang out, stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Dad, please. Flynn is the first person who's ever made me feel like I'm not broken." The words echoed in the concrete space, bouncing off walls and settling into the heavy silence that followed. Riker stopped moving entirely, his entire body going rigid. I watched as something shifted in his expression, just for a heartbeat, Just for a fraction of a second, his hard exterior cracked. Like Cade's desperate plea had found a weakness in armor I'd thought impenetrable. Knox's grip on my arm loosened slightly, and we all stood frozen in that moment, waiting to see which direction Riker's decision would fall. The mafia boss's gray eyes moved from me to his son, then back again, calculating, weighing risks and benefits with the same cold precision he probably used to evaluate his enemies. The air felt thick enough to choke on, charged with tension and unspoken possibilities. Finally, Riker's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening once more into that impenetrable mask he wore like a second skin. "Knox, take him to the East Wing," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'll deal with this situation personally." There was something in the way he said personally that made my blood run cold, a promise of consequences I couldn't begin to predict. As Knox steered me out of the basement and through the mansion's labyrinthine hallways, I cast one final glance over my shoulder. Riker had knelt beside Cade, one hand resting on the boy's shoulder, speaking in tones too low for me to hear. But I caught the expression on the child's face, confusion mixed with hope, fear blended with determination. Whatever was about to happen would change everything. I could feel it in my bones, in the way my Omega instinct screamed warnings I couldn't fully interpret. Riker Vale was not a man who forgave easily, not someone who tolerated what he perceived as insubordination or threat. And I had just challenged him in front of his most precious possession. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before us, each step taking me further from Cade and deeper into unknown territory within the Vale Empire. Knox escorted me into the mansion's East Wing, through corridors I'd never been permitted to enter during my months working here. We stopped at a nondescript door that looked no different from dozens of others, but when he pushed it open, my blood turned to ice. The room was clearly designed for interrogation, soundproof walls covered in dark padding, a single metal chair bolted to the floor in the center, and absolutely no windows. This was where Riker Vale extracted information from people who crossed him, and now I was being placed in that very chair. My Omega instincts went haywire, flooding my system with adrenaline and the primal urge to flee. But running was pointless. Even if I somehow escaped this room, Riker's guards would hunt me down before I made it to the mansion's gates. So I sat, forcing my trembling hands to rest calmly in my lap, and waited. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of ventilation that wouldn't carry my screams beyond these walls. When the door finally opened, I expected Knox or perhaps another guard. Instead, Riker himself entered, alone. He shrugged off his expensive suit jacket, draping it carefully over a second chair he'd brought with him, then rolled up his sleeves with methodical precision. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, like a predator circling prey it had already decided to consume. He positioned the chair directly across from me and sat, leaning forward so his elbows rested on his knees, bringing his face uncomfortably close to mine. "Tell me the truth, Flynn," he began, his voice deceptively calm. "Who sent you here? Which of my enemies is using you to get close to Cade?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I blinked rapidly, trying to process the implication that I was some kind of spy, some planted threat designed to infiltrate his family. "What? Nobody sent me," I protested, hearing the slight tremor in my own voice. "I'm just a tutor, Mr. Vale. Your wife hired me before she passed away." The mention of Leora seemed to strike a nerve. Riker's jaw tightened, muscles jumping beneath his skin, and I knew I'd touched on the wound that had never properly healed. His wife had been killed a year ago, kidnapped and murdered by a rival gang in a power play that had made Riker even more ruthless, even more isolated. Since then, he'd kept Cade locked away from the outside world, protected but also in prison. "You think I'll trust you just because you smell sweet?" Riker said, ice-coating every syllable. "I know how Omegas operate, how you manipulate with pheromones and pretty words. You could be working for anyone, earning my confidence only to strike when I'm vulnerable." His assumptions stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd never used my designation to manipulate anyone, had always prided myself on honesty and directness. But clearly, Riker saw me through a lens colored by past betrayals and constant threats. My patience, already worn thin by stress and fear, finally snapped. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor with a harsh screech, and forced myself to meet his gaze head-on. Challenging an alpha this way was incredibly stupid. They were biologically programmed to dominate, to punish defiance, but I was beyond caring about the potential consequences. If I'm working for anyone, it's for Cade, I declared, pouring conviction into every word. I have zero interest in your mafia politics, your gang wars, or whatever dangerous games you play. All I care about is that little boy upstairs who thinks he's worthless, because the world treats blindness like a death sentence. I want him to know he's capable, strong, valued. Riker stood slowly, eliminating the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He towered over me, using his physical presence as intimidation, and his scent intensified. Dark cedar wood mixed with smoke and something almost predatory that made my omega biology respond in ways I desperately tried to suppress. My body wanted to submit, to bare my throat, to show this dominant alpha that I posed no threat. But I refused to give in to base instinct. You realize I could end you right here in this room, Riker whispered, his breath ghosting across my cheek. No one would ever find your body. You'd simply disappear and the world would die turning. The threat should have terrified me into compliance, but instead, something reckless took control of my mouth. Then do it, I challenged, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. But afterward, Cade won't have anyone to show him he's more than his disability. He'll spend the rest of his life thinking he's a burden, believing he should be ashamed of needing help. For a long moment, Riker said nothing. He simply stared at me with those calculating gray eyes, as if trying to read the truth of my soul through sheer force of will. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped back, putting distance between us once again. His expression became unreadable, a mask sliding into place that revealed nothing of his thoughts. You will not conduct any more self-defense training, he stated firmly, though I noticed his tone had lost some of its sharp edge. However, if you genuinely care about Cade's well-being, you may continue his regular education. But understand this, if I catch you doing anything suspicious, anything that makes me question your motives, this conversation will seem pleasant by comparison. He turned and left without another word, the door slamming shut behind him with enough force to rattle the frame. I collapsed back into the chair, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight, and sucked in great gulps of air as if I'd been drowning. My heart raced not just from his threats or the confrontation, but from something more confusing, the way my body had responded to his proximity, the way his scent had awakened something I had no business feeling. Several minutes passed before Knox returned, his expression as blank as always. Boss says you can resume tutoring Cade, he announced in a monotone that made it impossible to gauge whether he approved or disapproved. But I'll be monitoring your sessions, every single one. I nodded my understanding, not trusting my voice to remain steady. As I followed Knox back through the mansion's corridors, I glimpsed Riker standing in his study, visible through the partially open door. He was watching me, his hands braced on his desk, his entire posture radiating conflict. It was the look of a man who wanted to trust but had been betrayed too many times to let his guard down. Something told me this was far from over. The dynamics between us had shifted in that interrogation room. Some invisible line had been crossed, and neither of us quite knew how to navigate what came next. The following morning arrived with unexpected stillness. I approached Cade's room expecting awkwardness or tension, some residual aftermath from yesterday's confrontation with his father. Instead, I found the boy sitting cross-legged on his bed, fingers dancing across a braille book with evident excitement. The moment my footsteps sounded in the doorway, his face lit up with genuine joy. "Flynn," he exclaimed, abandoning the book to turn toward my voice. "Dad told me you're staying. I thought maybe you'd left for good." The relief in his tone made my chest tighten with emotion. I settled into the chair beside his bed, watching as he fidgeted with barely contained energy. "I'm not going anywhere, buddy," I assured him gently, though we should probably be more cautious about what activities we do together. We began our usual morning routine, braille reading exercises followed by mathematics. But I could sense Cade's attention wandering. His fingers tapped in absent rhythm against his textbook and he kept starting to speak before stopping himself. "What's on your mind?" I finally asked, setting aside the math problems we'd been working through. Cade took a deep breath, gathering courage for whatever request he was about to make. "Can I ask you something?" he said hesitantly. When I encouraged him to continue, the words tumbled out in a rush. I want to learn music. Piano specifically. My mom used to play before she died. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, heavy with grief that hadn't fully healed. She had this one piece she loved, but Dad made her stop practicing it, said it reminded him too much of better times. I thought maybe if I learned it, I could finish what she started. The request was so pure, so achingly innocent, that refusing never even crossed my mind. I guided Cade through the mansion's winding hallways to a room I'd only glimpsed in passing. The music room. Dust motes danced in the air when I opened the door, and a magnificent grand piano dominated the space, its black surface dulled by years of neglect. Sheet music lay scattered across the bench, frozen in time from whenever Leora had last sat here. Cade's fingers found the keys with reverence, touching them as if they were sacred relics. This was hers, he breathed, and somehow I knew he could sense his mother's presence lingering in this forgotten space. I can almost smell her perfume, like she just stepped away for a moment. I began teaching him the fundamentals, how to find middle C, the relationship between notes, the patterns of scales and chords. His natural musicality became apparent almost immediately. Where his blindness hindered him in some areas, his hearing had developed with extraordinary sharpness. He could identify pitches with perfect accuracy, could distinguish subtle differences in tone that most people would miss entirely. An hour into our lesson, Cade attempted his first simple melody. His playing was halting, imperfect, fingers occasionally stumbling over transitions, but there was undeniable beauty in the effort. His entire face transformed with concentration, losing the constant weariness he usually carried. For those few minutes, he was simply a child discovering joy in creation. I was smiling, pride swelling in my chest, when the door burst open without warning. Riker stood framed in the entrance, and beside him was Drake, an alpha I'd seen around the mansion, who always made my skin crawl with his calculating stares. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Riker's expression darkened. "What is happening here?" he demanded, his eyes fixing on me with sharp accusation. "I explicitly told you academic subjects only. Where does music fit into that category?" I maintained my composure, though my palms grew sweaty. "Cade requested this himself, Mr. Vale. Music connects him to his mother's memory. I believed it could serve therapeutic purposes, helping with both confidence building and concentration improvement." "You believed," Riker interrupted, his voice taking on that dangerous edge I'd heard in the interrogation room. "You made a decision about my son's education without consulting me, without permission, completely disregarding the boundaries I established." Drake chose that moment to inject himself into the confrontation, moving closer with a smirk that made my stomach turn. "Seems like this Omega has no respect for your authority, Riker. Keeps overstepping, keeps pushing limits. Maybe you should consider hiring someone who actually understands their place, someone who follows instructions instead of making up their own rules." But before Riker could respond, before the situation could escalate further, Cade spoke up. His voice was small but determined, carrying a firmness I'd never heard from him before. "If Flynn leaves, I won't cooperate anymore. No lessons, no studying, nothing. I won't eat either." The declaration shocked everyone in the room. Cade never defied his father, never pushed back against decisions made on his behalf. Riker's face registered genuine surprise, as if his son had suddenly become a stranger. I placed a reassuring hand on Cade's shoulder, torn between pride at his bravery and fear of potential consequences. Riker's jaw worked silently, and he shot Drake a look so venomous that the other alpha immediately retreated several steps, though resentment still burned in his eyes. "Fine," Riker eventually ground out, the words seeming to cost him significant effort. "But this is your final warning, Flynn. One more instance of disregarding my explicit instructions, one more time you make decisions without my approval, and the consequences will be severe." Am I making myself clear? I nodded quickly, not trusting myself to speak. After both men left, Drake casting one last hostile glare in my direction, I pulled Cade into a gentle hug. "Thank you for standing up for me, buddy," I whispered. "But please don't confront your father like that. It could be dangerous." "You're important to me, Flynn," Cade said simply, as if that explained everything, justified any risk. His words strengthened my resolve to protect this child, to give him every opportunity to thrive despite the liats others tried to impose on him. As I prepared to leave that evening, I noticed Riker standing in his study, visible through the partially open door. He wasn't working, wasn't occupied with phone calls or paperwork. Instead, he was watching me with an expression that defied easy interpretation, confusion mixed with something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or the beginning of understanding. Our eyes met for just a moment before I looked away, continuing toward the exit. Something fundamental had shifted between us, I realized. The battle lines were still drawn, but they'd become blurred somehow, less clearly defined than before. The following days passed with an unexpected calmness that almost felt too good to be true. I continued teaching Cade his regular lessons while he practiced piano during our breaks, his small fingers growing more confident on the keys with passing hour. What struck me most was Riker's new pattern of behavior. He would stand just outside the music room door, never entering, just observing us through the crack with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. He was trying to understand something, puzzle out some equation that didn't have an obvious solution. It was as if he was seeing his son truly happy for the first time in a year and couldn't comprehend how this stranger had accomplished what he could not. But Friday evening shattered that fragile peace entirely. I was walking past the garden preparing to leave for the day, my bag slung over my shoulder and my mind already drifting to the quiet evening ahead. Then sharp cracks split the air. Gunshots, loud and violent, echoing off the mansion walls like thunder in a confined space. My heart seized in my chest and one name tore through my mind with crystalline clarity: Cade. I ran to his bedroom first, taking stairs 2 at a time, my lungs burning with exertion and fear. The door stood open but the room was empty, his braille books scattered across the bed where he'd left them. Panic clawed at my throat as I searched frantically, the living room with its expensive furniture untouched, the kitchen where staff prepared meals but hadn't seen him, the library with its towering bookshelves creating shadows in every corner nowhere. My breathing became ragged, my omega instincts screaming that something terrible had happened, that the child I'd grown to care for deeply was in danger. Then memory clicked into place. The basement, our original training spot where this entire complicated relationship had begun. I flew down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste, and froze in the doorway at what I saw. Cade was curled in the corner, his small body trembling violently like a leaf in a storm, hands clamped over his ears so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Silent sobs racked his frame, tears streaming down his face as he rocked back and forth like he was trying to physically escape his own skin, trying to make himself as small as possible. Cade. I dropped beside him, gathering him into my arms without hesitation and creating a protective cocoon with my body. What happened? Are you hurt? Did someone touch you? His words came out between gasping breaths, broken and terrified in a way that made my chest ache. The gunshots, they scare me so much, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, cracking on every other word. Whenever Dad has his meetings down here, whenever I hear those sounds, I think someone's coming to hurt me like they hurt Mom. I think they'll take me away and I'll never come back. That I'll end up like her. That Dad will lose me too. The confession broke something inside me, shattered whatever professional distance I'd been trying to maintain. This child had been carrying such profound trauma and no one had properly addressed it. No one had given him the space to feel safe in his own home. I held him tighter, letting my omega scent release naturally. Sweet vanilla mixed with calming lavender, a biological gift that helped soothe distress, especially in children who were vulnerable and afraid. You're safe, Cade. I promise you're safe. Those sounds are just your father's security training. Nothing more. He's teaching his guards how to protect this house, how to protect you. No one will ever hurt you while I'm here, while your father is alive. Do you understand me? Gradually his breathing steadied. The violent trembling subsided to occasional shivers, but then he said something that caught me completely off guard, something that made my heart stutter in my chest. Flynn, would you consider marrying my dad? Then you'd stay forever and never leave us. Then I'd know you were really part of our family. The question stunned me into complete silence. I struggled to find appropriate words, my face burning with embarrassment and confusion. Cade, that's not how these things work. Your father doesn't even like me. Not really. He barely trusts me after everything with Drake in the interrogation. But Cade shook his head with surprising conviction, his grip on my shirt tightening until the fabric bunched in his small fists. He does though. I can tell even without seeing him. When you're in the room, his breathing changes. It gets faster, like he's nervous or excited or both at once. His footsteps sound different too. Lighter, more careful. I've never heard him move like that around anyone else. Not even Mom toward the end. Could that possibly be true? Before I could process the implications, before I could ask Cade what else he'd noticed, the basement door opened and Riker appeared. Probably having tracked my distressed scent through the mansion, alpha senses were incredibly acute when it came to their omegas, even unbonded ones. When he saw me holding Cade, cradling his son against my chest protectively, his expression transformed, the hard mask cracking like ice under pressure to reveal genuine concern I'd never witnessed before. "What's wrong? What happened?" he asked, and for once there was no accusation in his tone, only worry that seemed to consume his entire being. I explained quietly about the gunshots triggering Cade's fear, about his terror that history would repeat itself, that he'd lose everything just like he'd lost his mother and his sight in one terrible night. Riker's face went pale, all color draining from his features until he looked almost ghostly in the basement's dim lighting. He knelt beside us without hesitation, not caring that his expensive suit was getting dusty from the concrete floor, that he was lowering himself to our level in a way that spoke volumes about his priorities. "Cade, I swear on everything I am that you will never be hurt like that again. That's my promise to you, my word as your father and as the head of this family. Those sounds are just training exercises, keeping my guards prepared so they can protect you better. No one can touch you as long as I'm alive, as long as there's breath in my body." Cade nodded slowly, but I noticed Riker's eyes also flickered to me, filled with a strange gratitude mixed with something deeper that I couldn't quite identify, something that made my stomach flutter. "Thank you," Riker said to me, his voice barely audible and slightly hoarse with emotion he was clearly trying to suppress. "Thank you for being here when he needed someone, when I wasn't available to comfort him myself." It was the first time he genuinely thanked me, the first time his walls had lowered even slightly to reveal the man beneath the mafia boss exterior. After Cade's breathing had completely calmed and exhaustion overtook him, the kind of bone-deep weariness that follows emotional breakdowns, Riker lifted the boy with remarkable gentleness, cradling him like the most precious thing in existence, and carried him to bed. I followed silently, intending to leave once Cade was settled, but Riker stopped me with a quiet request that surprised me. "Walk with me in the garden? I'd like to speak with you privately." It wasn't a command, surprisingly, but an actual question that left the choice in my hands. Outside, under the silver moonlight that softened the harsh lines of the mansion and cast everything in ethereal glow, Riker finally let his guard drop further than I'd thought possible for someone in his position. "I was probably wrong about you, Flynn," he admitted, his voice low and rough with emotion he wasn't accustomed to expressing. "Cade hasn't bonded with anyone since Leora died. He'd shut himself off completely, built walls even I couldn't penetrate. But with you, he's becoming the child he should be, curious, brave, willing to try new things despite his fear." I watched him carefully, unsure how to respond to this vulnerability. "I only want him to be happy, to know his blindness doesn't define his worth or limit his possibilities." Riker turned to face me directly, moonlight catching in his gray eyes and making them almost luminescent. "Call me Riker. We're past the point of formalities, don't you think? After everything we've been through together, Mr. Vale seems absurdly distant." The gesture felt significant, like he was offering me entry into a part of himself he kept locked away from the world. "You do so much for Cade, more than I've been capable of giving him lately. I appreciate that, even if I'm terrible at showing it, even if my actions have suggested otherwise." My heart stuttered in my chest, and I wondered if perhaps Cade's observation had been accurate. Maybe Riker did feel something beyond grudging acceptance of my presence in his home. The next 2 days felt almost suspiciously peaceful, like the calm before a devastating storm that would tear through our lives. Riker allowed me extended time with Cade, no longer hovering or questioning my methods, and occasionally he would slip into the music room to watch his son play piano, never speaking, never interrupting, just observing with an expression that seemed torn between pain and hope. The melodies Cade produced were getting more complex, more confident, and I could see pride blooming in Riker's eyes when he thought no one was watching him. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this fractured family was starting to heal. That we'd found some kind of equilibrium. Tuesday morning destroyed that illusion completely and without warning. I was reviewing vocabulary with Cade, helping him learn new Braille words, when Drake burst into the room with the subtlety of a battering ram. His energy was aggressive and purposeful in a way that immediately set off every alarm bell my instincts possessed. "Flynn, Riker wants you immediately," he announced, his tone brooking absolutely no argument, leaving no room for question. Something felt fundamentally wrong about this summons. Riker typically sent Knox for messages, the head guard who was professional and straightforward. Never Drake, who'd made his intense dislike of me abundantly clear from our very first meeting. "Where exactly?" I asked suspiciously, rising slowly from my chair and watching Drake's face for tells. Drake's answer came too quickly, too smoothly, like he'd rehearsed it. "The meeting room on the second floor. He's waiting and he's not patient today." I reassured Cade I'd return shortly, squeezing his shoulder in what I hoped was a comforting gesture, and followed Drake into the hallway. But as we walked through the mansion's winding corridors, the route became increasingly unfamiliar, taking turns I'd never explored before. "This isn't the right direction to the meeting room," I stated firmly, stopping in my tracks and refusing to move another step. "I've been to that room before. We should have turned left back there." Drake's smile turned cruel, revealing something dark and calculating beneath his professional veneer. "It's a shortcut through the service corridors. Don't you trust me, Omega?" The way he said my designation made it sound like an insult, like something dirty. He grabbed my arm before I could react or pull away, his grip painfully tight, fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to bruise, and dragged me toward a section of the basement I'd only glimpsed once before, a deeper level that seemed designed for much darker purposes than storage. "Where are we really going? Riker isn't anywhere near here, is he?" "You're lying to me." Drake shoved me hard toward a metal chair that looked like it belonged in a torture chamber, pulling rope from his pocket with practiced efficiency that suggested he'd done this before. "You're absolutely right, he's not here. But by the time he realizes what's happened, you'll be long gone, disappeared without a trace." Terror flooded my system as he began binding my wrists behind the chair back, the rope cutting into my skin and making my hands tingle with restricted blood flow. "What are you doing? Riker will find out about this. He'll kill you for touching me." Drake laughed, a harsh sound completely without humor or warmth. "By the time he realizes anything is wrong, you'll already be sold and shipped far away. I'll tell him you quit, that you couldn't handle the pressure of working for a family like ours, that you found the danger too much. He'll be angry, but he'll move on eventually." He secured my ankles to the chair legs with more rope, moving with the confidence of someone who'd restrained people before, who knew exactly how to make escape impossible. "Why are you doing this to me? What have I done to you?" I demanded, struggling uselessly against bonds that only tightened with movement, cutting deeper into my skin. Drake's face contorted with genuine anger, with resentment that had clearly been building for weeks. "Because you're making Riker weak, don't you understand that? He used to be decisive, ruthless, feared by every gang in New York. Now he's constantly distracted by you and that useless blind kid who should have been sent away long ago. It makes him vulnerable, shows our enemies he has soft spots they can exploit. So I'm removing the problem, permanently, cleanly. There's a trafficking ring operating out of Boston that pays extremely well for Omegas, especially pretty educated ones like you who can fetch premium prices." He pressed tape over my mouth before I could scream for help, sealing off my voice completely. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest as panic overwhelmed rational thought entirely. This was how I would die, or worse, disappear into a nightmare I couldn't even imagine, sold like property to people who would use me in ways I didn't want to consider. Drake pulled out his phone and made a brief call, his voice casual like he was ordering supplies. "Ready for pickup. Be here in 30 minutes. Side entrance." He pocketed the device and smirked at my obvious terror, seeming to enjoy my fear. "No one will hear you down here. The room's completely soundproofed, designed specifically so screams don't carry." Riker had it built for interrogations. But then the door didn't just open, it exploded inward with tremendous force, hinges tearing free from the frame and the entire door crashing to the ground. Riker stood in the destroyed doorway with Knox and 2 other guards flanking him, all of them armed with weapons drawn. And I'd never seen such concentrated rage on a human face in my entire life. His alpha presence flooded the room like a physical tidal wave, so overwhelmingly intense the air itself seemed to vibrate with power. "Drake!" Riker's roar actually shook the walls, dust falling from the ceiling. "What the hell do you think you're doing with him?" Drake stumbled backward, fear finally cracking through his earlier arrogance as he realized how badly he'd miscalculated. "Boss, I was just protecting the business. Protecting you. This Omega is making you soft, making you vulnerable to attack." Riker's voice dropped to a deadly calm that was somehow infinitely more terrifying than his shouting had been. "You touched what belongs to me without my permission. You put your hands on my Omega." I registered his possessive phrasing even through my overwhelming fear and relief. He drew his gun with smooth, practiced precision, pointing it directly at Drake's head with unwavering steadiness. "You have exactly 2 choices right now. Run and never show your face anywhere near me again, or this becomes your final moment on Earth. Decide immediately." Sweat beaded on Drake's forehead, running down his temples. "Riker, please. We've worked together for years, been through battles together." Riker's finger moved to the trigger. 3, 2. Drake bolted like a rabbit fleeing a wolf, tripping over his own feet in his desperate haste to escape, and the guards immediately pursued to ensure he actually left the property. Riker rushed to me, holstering his weapon, and his hands were shaking slightly as he cut through the ropes. The first time I'd ever seen his legendary composure crack this badly. He peeled the tape from my mouth with infinite care, his fingers gentle despite his earlier violence. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you anywhere? Tell me everything." Riker cupped my face tenderly, his eyes scanning every visible inch of me for injuries, for marks, for any sign of harm. "I'm fine. Just terrified," I managed, though my entire body trembled with aftershock, adrenaline still flooding my system. Riker pulled me into his arms without hesitation, his embrace protective and warm and safe, and his scent, cedarwood and smoke with underlying notes of something uniquely him, worked immediate magic on my frayed nerves, calming me like nothing else could. "Forgive me," he whispered against my hair, his breath warm on my scalp. "I should have protected you better. I should never have trusted Drake, should have seen what he was planning. I almost lost you today, and I don't know what I would have done." His voice cracked on those last words, revealing depths of feeling I hadn't suspected existed. I gripped his shirt, grounding myself in his solid presence, in the reality that I was safe now. "How did you know where to find me? How did you know something was wrong?" Riker pulled back slightly, meeting my eyes with an intensity that stole my breath. "Cade heard Drake tell you I'd summoned you. He knew immediately that I was in meetings across town, that I couldn't possibly have sent for you. So he called my cell phone and told me something was wrong, that Drake had taken you somewhere. That boy saved your life today, Flynn. His quick thinking and bravery saved you." The revelation struck me with physical force. Cade's awareness and quick action had prevented my disappearance into horror. And in this moment, holding on to Riker while he held me like I was something infinitely precious and irreplaceable, I finally understood that his feelings ran much deeper than simple appreciation for his son's tutor, deeper than gratitude or basic respect. That evening, after the chaos had settled and Drake had been permanently expelled from the organization, Riker invited me into his private study, a sanctuary where even Knox needed explicit permission to enter. I stepped inside tentatively, feeling like I was trespassing on sacred ground, and took in the photographs covering the walls and careful arrangements. Images of Leora and Cade in happier times, frozen moments of a family that had been violently destroyed, memories preserved behind glass like museum pieces. One picture particularly caught my attention and held it. Leora sitting at the grand piano with young Cade on her lap, maybe 3 years old, both of them smiling radiantly at whoever held the camera. "Flynn, there's something you need to know, something I should have told you before now," Riker began, standing at his massive desk with his back to me as if he couldn't face me while speaking these words. His shoulders were rigid with tension, his hands braced on the desk surface. Cade's blindness wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, calculated cruelty designed to hurt me in the worst possible way. My chest tightened painfully, breath catching in my throat. "What do you mean?" "I thought it was some kind of chemical exposure during..." Riker's fists clenched at his sides, knuckles going white with the force of his grip. When Leora was taken, Cade was with her. We were having dinner at a restaurant in Midtown. Nothing fancy or special, just family time away from this house and my work. I stepped away for a business call that my second-in-command said was urgent. Just 2 minutes maximum. When I returned to our table, they were both gone. Vanished like they'd never been there. His voice thickened with emotion he could barely contain, with guilt that had festered for a year. My rivals had grabbed them in broad daylight, in a crowded restaurant, because they knew I'd let my guard down. And when Leora fought to protect Cade, when she actually managed to wound one of her captors badly enough to require medical attention, they retaliated with viciousness I still have nightmares about. They used industrial chemicals, the kind that burn on contact, and they poured them directly into Cade's eyes while forcing Leora to watch. Permanent damage specifically designed to hurt me through my son, to leave me with a living reminder of my failure. My hand flew to my mouth, horror washing over me in overwhelming waves that made me feel physically ill. Oh God, Riker, that's beyond evil, beyond anything I could imagine. Tears filled my eyes unbidden, spilling down my cheeks. Leora died trying to save him from worse, Riker continued, finally turning to face me, and I could see the devastation written across every line of his face. His eyes were red-rimmed, gleaming with unshed tears he refused to let fall. And Cade witnessed everything until the chemicals destroyed his sight completely. The last image burned into his memory forever is his mother's death, her blood on the floor. I knew if he understood the full truth, if he knew the real story, he'd blame himself eternally. He'd think if he hadn't been there, she'd still be alive. So I told him it was a simple accident at home. Something random with no one at fault, no one blame. I moved closer instinctively, drawn by his pain and the need to offer comfort. But now you carry all that guilt yourself. You blame yourself for what happened to both of them. Riker's laugh was bitter and broken, completely devoid of genuine amusement. Of course I do. It is entirely my fault. If I hadn't taken that call, if I'd been more vigilant about our security, if I'd protected my family better the way an alpha should. I cut him off, placing my hand firmly on his arm and forcing him to meet my eyes. Stop that right now. You're not omniscient, Riker. You can't predict every possible danger. You did the best you could in an impossible situation. You're not a perfect alpha, but you're a devoted father who's done everything possible to keep Cade safe since then. He looked at me with such raw vulnerability that it physically hurt to witness, like looking directly at an open wound. But since you arrived in our lives, Cade's changed completely. You've given him confidence and hope I never could provide no matter how hard I tried. You've shown him that blindness isn't a limitation on his worth or his capabilities, that he can still accomplish amazing things. Riker's hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with unexpected tenderness. And you've changed me too in ways I didn't think were possible anymore. I've lived on pure anger and thoughts of revenge for so long, letting those emotions fuel every decision. But your presence here, your kindness and patience and refusal to be intimidated, you've reminded me there's more to life than vengeance. That I can be better, should be better for Cade's sake. My heart raced as understanding finally dawned completely. Riker, his other hand joined the first, cradling my face like I was something infinitely precious and breakable, something he was terrified of damaging. I know I'm not nearly enough for you, Flynn. I'm damaged beyond repair, dangerous, living a life that could destroy you just by association. But Cade loves you desperately, needs you in ways he never needed anyone else. And so do I. I've loved you probably from that very first day when you stood up for him in the basement, when you challenged me without showing an ounce of fear despite knowing what I'm capable of doing to people who cross me. The confession left me completely speechless, my mind struggling to process that Riker Vale, the most ruthless mafia boss in New York, was declaring his feelings for me. You love me? The question came out barely above a whisper, disbelieving and awed. His smile was sad but genuine, vulnerable in ways I'd never seen. Your courage, your compassion, the way you see Cade as perfect exactly as he is, it drives me crazy in the best possible way. But I won't force you into anything, won't use my position or power to pressure you. If you don't want this life, if you don't want me with all my darkness and danger, I'll understand completely. I'll let you walk away safely and set you up somewhere far from here." He leaned closer but stopped short of actually touching his lips to mine, waiting for permission I hadn't yet granted. "But if you choose to stay," he whispered, his breath ghosting across my skin and making me shiver, "I'll protect you and Cade with everything I have, every resource at my disposal. I'd die before letting harm come to either of you ever again." I searched his gray eyes intensely and found only absolute honesty there. Raw emotion stripped of all pretense and protection. Vulnerability he'd never shown another living soul. And I realized that despite all the complications, despite the very real danger, I felt exactly the same way about him. I want to stay here. For Cade? Yes. Because I love that boy like he's already mine. But also for you because somehow against all logic and reason, I've fallen completely in love with you too, Riker. His smile transformed his entire face, erasing years of hardness and grief, making him look younger and lighter. Then he kissed me, and the world disappeared. The kiss was soft yet passionate, desperate yet tender, like he was pouring an entire year's worth of loneliness and pain and hope into this single connection between us. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard and slightly dazed, he pressed his forehead to mine in a gesture of intimacy that felt more profound than the kiss itself. "You're mine forever, Flynn. My Omega. My partner. Everything I never knew I still needed in my life." The next morning, when I entered Cade's room for our regular lesson, he immediately perked up from where he sat on his bed, his nose twitching as he scented the air with the acute sensitivity his besom had enhanced. "Flynn, you smell different today. You smell like Dad now, like your scents are mixed together." His observation was perfectly accurate. Our scents had mingled overnight, the biological marker of bonding between Alpha and Omega that couldn't be hidden or faked. "Does that mean you're together now? Does it mean you're staying forever and becoming part of our family officially?" His excitement was palpable, his smile wider than I'd ever seen it, reaching all the way to his sightless eyes. I knelt beside his bed, my own smile matching his joy. "Yes, buddy. We're a real family now. You, me, and your dad together." Cade launched himself into my arms with enough force to nearly knock me over, hugging me with all the considerable strength in his small body. And I looked up to see Riker standing in the doorway watching us. Pride and love shone clearly in his expression, transforming his usually hard features into something soft and beautiful. He mouthed thank you silently, and I knew he meant for everything, for loving his son, for giving them both hope, for choosing to stay despite every logical reason to run. This journey had been absolutely terrifying, painful beyond measure, filled with uncertainty and very real danger that could return at any moment. But it had led me to a family I'd never imagined finding, a broken Alpha who loved me fiercely, a brave boy who'd become my son in every way that mattered, and a future that finally looked genuinely bright. We weren't perfect, not even remotely close to the idealized families in storybooks. But we were together, bonded by choice and love rather than just biology. And that was everything that truly mattered in this world.